The Iron Poker Bride, when cruelty met defiance. They auctioned her off like livestock, a 71-year-old woman with bruised wrists and empty pockets, sold to a man the town had already written off as worthless. What those laughing drunks didn't know was that Caleb Vance had stopped caring about their opinions the day he buried his family. And the frail Chinese woman standing on that wagon bed? She'd survived worse than their mockery. Before sunset, he'd marry her. Within months, they'd paint his porch with the blood of men who thought cruelty had no consequences. Like this video if you believe in second chances, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The town of Bitter Creek squatted in the Wyoming dust like something that had crawled there to die. It wasn't much. A wide street flanked by weathered storefronts, a saloon that leaked piano music and tobacco smoke, and a church nobody attended except for funerals. The wind came through constant and mean, carrying grit that worked its way into everything: clothes, food, the creases around people's eyes. Caleb Vance sat on the edge of that town the way he sat on the edge of everything else. Separate, watching, waiting for nothing in particular. His cabin stood a half-mile out, visible from the main road but far enough that folks didn't visit unless they had business. And nobody had business with Caleb Vance. He was 34 but looked older. The kind of weathering that came from the inside, not just sun and wind. Tall, lean in a way that suggested missed meals rather than natural build. His hands were scarred from work. His jaw perpetually shadowed with stubble he didn't bother shaving more than once a week. Dark hair hung past his collar, usually tied back with whatever string he had handy. His eyes were the color of winter sky, that pale, washed-out blue that didn't give anything away. People said he'd had a wife once. A daughter, too. Said there'd been a fire, or maybe sickness, or maybe something worse depending on who was telling it. Caleb never corrected the stories. Let them think what they wanted. The truth was his, and he kept it locked down tight along with everything else worth keeping. He came into town once a week, sometimes less, bought supplies at Morrison's General Store, paid in coins he earned doing odd jobs for the ranches outside town, fence mending, horse breaking, work nobody else wanted. He didn't drink at the saloon, didn't join the card games, didn't make conversation beyond what was necessary to conduct business. Vance is touched, old Morrison would say, tapping his temple. Seen it before. Man gets too far inside his own head. He don't come back right. Maybe that was true. Caleb didn't spend much time examining it. It was a Thursday in late September when things changed. The kind of day where the heat had finally broken but the cold hadn't set in yet. That brief window where the air felt almost forgiving. Caleb had come to town for lamp oil and coffee, nothing more. He'd planned to be in and out before the afternoon crowd gathered. But the crowd had already gathered. They'd formed a loose circle in the street outside the saloon, maybe 20 men deep, with more drifting over from the various shops and doorways. The kind of crowd that formed when something unusual was happening, when the daily monotony cracked open enough to let in some novelty. Caleb kept walking toward Morrison's, eyes down, trying to pass without drawing attention. $20, someone shouted, and laughter rippled through the crowd. 20? Hell, I'll give 25. More laughter. Caleb glanced over despite himself. In the center of the circle stood Rourke Stannis, a man Caleb actively avoided. Stannis owned a freight business, employed half the men in town, and carried himself with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced real consequences. He was thick through the shoulders, ruddy-faced, with a mustache he waxed to sharp points. Today, he wore a vest embroidered with gold thread, his thumbs hooked through the armholes like he was addressing a crowd of admirers rather than drunks and idlers. And beside him, standing on the bed of a freight wagon, was a woman. She was old. That was the first thing Caleb registered. 70 at least, maybe older, small and thin in a way that made her look like she might blow away in a strong wind. Chinese by the look of her, though Caleb had only seen a handful of Chinese folks in his life, mostly railroad workers passing through. She wore a dark blue cotton dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to distinguish from the patches. Her hair, completely white, was pulled back in a tight bun. Her face was a map of lines, weathered and impassive. But it was her hands that caught Caleb's attention. They were clasped in front of her, and around her wrists were marks. Dark bruises, some fresh, some fading to yellow. The kind of marks that came from rope or chains. $30. Another voice, slurred with afternoon drinking. Stannis grinned, showing teeth. Now we're talking. $30 for this fine specimen of Oriental womanhood. She can cook, she can clean, she can definitely cook and clean. This got a bigger laugh. Who'll give me 35? Caleb stopped walking. The woman's expression hadn't changed. She stared straight ahead, not at the crowd, not at Stannis, not at anything. Her jaw was set in a way that reminded Caleb of soldiers he'd known during the war, men who'd learned to disappear inside themselves when the world got too terrible to bear. Come on now, gentlemen. Stannis was in full showman mode, arms spread wide. This ain't gonna last. She's old, sure, but she's docile as they come. Broke in real proper. Won't give you no sass, won't run off. Perfect for a man who wants peace and quiet in his household. What's she doing here? Caleb heard himself ask. The question cut through the noise. Heads turned. Stannis's grin widened. Well, well, Caleb Vance joins the living. Stannis made an exaggerated bow. She's here because I own her, Vance. Bought her contract fair and square from a work camp outside Rawlins. She was costing me more to feed than she was worth in labor, so I'm liquidating my assets. Free enterprise, you understand. You can't sell a person. The words came out flat, matter of fact. Caleb wasn't trying to start something. He was just stating what seemed obvious. Stannis's expression shifted, the showman's charm cooling by several degrees. I can sell a labor contract, which is what I'm doing. All legal-like. You got a problem with that? Take it up with the territorial government. Now, unless you're bidding, move along. Caleb looked at the woman again. She still hadn't moved, hadn't acknowledged the conversation. But something in the set of her shoulders had changed, a tension, like she was bracing for something. 35, a voice from the crowd, eager to move things along. 35 to Crenshaw. Do I hear 40? Caleb knew Crenshaw by reputation. He ran a ranch 10 miles north, worked his hands hard and his animals harder. There were stories about what happened to the people who worked for him, especially the ones who couldn't speak English well enough to complain. 40. Caleb said it before he'd fully thought it through. The crowd went quiet. Stannis's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Say that again? $40. Stannis studied him for a long moment, then broke into a delighted grin. Caleb Vance, entering the bidding. Now this is entertainment, boys. The hermit wants himself a wife. The crowd roared. Someone clapped Caleb on the shoulder. He ignored it, keeping his eyes on the woman. She'd turned her head slightly, just enough that he could see her profile. Still no expression, still that awful, distant stillness. 45. Crenshaw wasn't amused. 50, Caleb said. 60. 70. The crowd was eating it up now. Whooping and hollering like this was better than a dogfight. Stannis conducted the chaos with evident pleasure, pointing between Caleb and Crenshaw like a referee. Crenshaw's face had gone red. He was a proud man, not used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Caleb, who existed on the margins of town society. $80 goddamn dollars! Caleb didn't have $80. He had $43 and some change buried in a tin can under his cabin floor. $43 that represented 6 months of fence mending and horse breaking saved for winter supplies. 100, he said. The crowd exploded. Crenshaw stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Stannis actually laughed out loud. $100. Now that is a bid, gentlemen. That is a man who knows what he wants. Stannis turned to Crenshaw. You gonna match it? Crenshaw spat in the dirt. For a used-up old Chinese woman? Hell no. Let the fool have her. Then by the power vested in me by absolutely nobody, I declare this contract sold to Caleb Vance for $100. Stannis jumped down from the wagon, hand extended. Cash only, Vance. You got it on you? I'll need an hour. An hour. Stannis made a show of pulling out a pocket watch. All right, 1 hour. But if you don't come back with my money, the bidding reopens and Crenshaw gets her at 80. He leaned in closer, voice dropping. And Vance? This better not be some kind of joke. You make me look foolish in front of these men. There'll be consequences. Caleb met his eyes. I'll be back. He turned and walked through the crowd, which parted for him now with a mixture of amusement and confusion. Behind him, he could hear Stannis already spinning the story, making theater out of it. The walk back to his cabin took 15 minutes at a hard pace. He dug up the tin can, counted out $43, then went through the cabin taking inventory. A set of silver spoons he'd never used, wedding gift from a life ago. His father's pocket watch, a rifle he'd bought 2 years back that he could replace with something cheaper. A pair of boots, barely worn. Morrison bought the spoons and the watch, asking no questions. The rifle went to a rancher who'd been eyeing it. The boots sold to a clerk at the telegraph office. $78 total. Caleb stared at the money in his hands, still short. He looked around the cabin, rough furniture he'd built himself. A few books, cookware, blankets. Nothing else worth selling that could be converted to cash in the next 40 minutes. Then his eyes landed on the shelf above the fireplace. A small wooden box carved with roses. Inside was a ring, plain gold band, thin enough that it had probably belonged to someone poor. His mother's ring, passed down when she died, given to his wife on their wedding day, pulled from the ashes of... He grabbed the box before he could think about it further, walked back to town, and sold it to the assayer for $25. That's too much, Caleb said when the man counted out the bills. It's what it's worth. The assayer was old, nearly blind, but his hands were steady as he pushed the money across the counter. Gold's gold, son, even the sad kind. Caleb made it back to the street with 5 minutes to spare. The crowd had thinned but not dispersed. Stannis stood by the wagon, the woman still on the bed behind him, exactly where she'd been before. She hadn't moved, hadn't sat down, hadn't shifted her weight, just stood there like a statue, staring at nothing. Well, well, Stannis smiled. Didn't think you'd actually show. Caleb counted out $100 in bills and coins, laying them in Stannis's palm. Stannis counted it twice, then nodded. Pleasure doing business. He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. This here's the contract. Sign it and she's yours. Legal and binding. Caleb took the paper. It was dense with language he only half understood. Terms of sale, transfer of obligations, indemnification clauses. At the bottom was a line for his signature. You even read that? Stannis asked. Enough. Well then, sign. Caleb signed. Stannis witnessed it with a flourish, then folded the paper and handed it back. Congratulations, Vance. You're now the proud owner of one elderly Chinese woman. I'm sure you two will be very happy together. The sarcasm was thick enough to cut. Caleb ignored him, turning to the wagon. The woman was watching him now. Not directly, she'd angled her face just slightly in his direction, enough that he knew she was aware of him. Her eyes were dark, unreadable. He offered his hand to help her down from the wagon. She didn't take it. They stood like that for a long moment, his hand extended, her standing motionless on the wagon bed. The crowd watched, amused, waiting to see what the hermit would do with his purchase. Please, Caleb said quietly. Just that one word. Something flickered in her expression. Not trust exactly, more like calculation. She was weighing options, making decisions in a language he couldn't read. Then she reached out and placed her hand in his. Her skin was paper-thin, cool to the touch. He could feel the bones of her fingers through the flesh. She weighed almost nothing as she stepped down, and up close he could see more details. The way her dress hung loose on a frame that had probably carried more weight once. The scar tissue around her wrists from whatever had left those bruises. The careful blankness of her expression that spoke of hard-won survival instincts. You got a name? He asked. She looked at him for a moment, then away. No answer. All right. He released her hand. Come on. He started walking. After a moment, she followed. The crowd parted again, some of them still laughing, making jokes about wedding nights and oriental mysteries. Caleb blocked it out, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other, not thinking about what he'd just done or why he'd done it. They were almost clear of the crowd when Morrison called out from his store porch. Vance, you need a preacher? Caleb stopped, turned. What? A preacher. You can't just take her home like livestock. There's proprieties. Morrison's face was serious for once, the usual mockery absent. Reverend Stills does marriages for $5. Otherwise, folks'll talk, say you're running a brothel or worse. Nobody cares about proprieties in this town? They care when it gives them an excuse to make trouble. Morrison glanced at the woman, then back at Caleb. Your business is your business, but get it done legal. Save yourself grief. Caleb looked at the woman. She was staring at the ground, face still carefully empty. You understand English? he asked her. A slight nod. Almost imperceptible, but there. Reverend Stills, you know what that means? Another nod. You want that? Or you want to just come to the cabin and I'll leave you be? She lifted her head then, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. Hers were black, utterly opaque. Whatever she was thinking remained locked behind them. Marriage, she said. Her voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. Better. All right then. Reverend Stills lived in a narrow house behind the church. He was a thin man with nervous hands and a persistent cough that he tried to hide behind a handkerchief. When Caleb knocked, the Reverend opened the door, already apologizing. I'm not taking services today. I'm afraid I'm not feeling... He stopped when he saw the woman. Oh. Morrison said you do marriages. Yes, of course. Stills stepped back, ushering them inside. Please, come in. The house smelled like old paper and sickness. Stills led them to a small sitting room where he fumbled with papers, hands shaking slightly as he found the right forms. I'll need names, he said, dipping a pen in ink. Caleb Vance. Stills wrote it down, then looked at the woman. And yours, ma'am? Silence. Ma'am? She might not speak English well, Caleb said, though she'd spoken before, but that had been 2 words, carefully chosen. Maybe that was all she trusted herself with. I need a name for the certificate, Stills said gently. The woman's jaw tightened. She looked at Caleb, then at the Reverend, then back at the floor. Maylene, she said finally. Name is Maylene. Stills wrote it down. Maylene. And a surname? Just Maylene. I need... That's all she's giving, Caleb interrupted. It's enough. Stills looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Caleb's expression stopped him. He wrote Maylene Vance on the certificate without further comment. The ceremony was brief. Stills read from a prayer book in a voice that kept breaking into coughs. There was no talk of love or cherishing, no mention of happiness or partnership, just the bare legal minimum. Do you take this woman? Do you take this man? By the power vested, I now pronounce. Caleb paid him $5. Stills gave them the certificate, shook Caleb's hand, and showed them out with evident relief. The sun was setting as they walked out of town. The air had cooled, and in the distance Caleb could see storm clouds building over the mountains. Good. They needed rain. The whole territory needed rain. Maylene walked beside him, not behind, maintaining a careful distance of about 3 feet. She moved quietly, economically, like someone conserving energy. Every few steps she'd glance to the side, checking the horizon, the road behind them, the spaces between buildings, looking for threats or exits. The cabin's about half a mile, Caleb said. You need to rest. We can stop. She shook her head once. They continued in silence. The cabin came into view as the light started failing, a single-room structure made of rough-cut timber with a stone chimney on one end and a narrow porch on the other. Not much to look at, but the roof didn't leak and the walls kept out most of the wind. A small barn stood about 20 yards off, housing Caleb's horse and a milk cow. Past that was a creek, running low this time of year but still flowing. Maylene stopped at the edge of the yard, taking it in. It ain't much, Caleb said. She didn't respond. He walked up to the door, opened it, and stepped aside. You can go in. I'll see to the animals, then I'll come back and we'll figure out sleeping arrangements. She stood motionless for another moment, then moved past him into the cabin. Caleb busied himself with the evening chores, fed the horse, milked the cow, checked the fences even though he'd checked them that morning. Anything to give her time to settle, to breathe, to decide he wasn't a threat. When he finally came back to the cabin, full dark had fallen. He'd half expected her to be gone, slipped out the back, disappeared into the night, fled to wherever people fled when they'd been pushed too far. But when he pushed open the door, she was there. She'd found the lamp and lit it. She stood by the table in the center of the room, as still as she'd been on the wagon, hands clasped in front of her. The cabin was small enough that Caleb could see everything from the doorway. The bed against the far wall, the fireplace with its cookpot and grate, the shelves holding supplies, the trunk containing his spare clothes. One room, one bed. You hungry? He asked. A slight nod. He moved to the shelves, pulled down cornmeal and salt pork, started preparing something simple. She watched, but didn't offer to help. didn't move from her spot by the table. "You can sit," he said. She remained standing. He cooked in silence, aware of her eyes tracking his movements. The food was nothing special, corn cakes and fried meat, coffee strong enough to strip paint. He set a plate on the table, poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "Eat." She looked at the food, then at him, then back at the food. "It ain't poisoned," he said, exasperated. "I'm eating the same thing." He sat down and started eating to prove the point. After a moment, she sat across from him and picked up the fork. She ate slowly, mechanically, like someone going through motions rather than enjoying a meal. But she cleaned the plate. When they'd finished, Caleb cleared the dishes and set them aside to wash later. Then he pulled a blanket from the trunk and handed it to her. "Bed's yours," he said. "I'll sleep on the floor by the fire." She stared at the blanket in her hands. "I ain't touching you," Caleb said flatly. "Not tonight, not tomorrow, not unless you decide you want that. Which I figure you won't, and that's fine. But you need to sleep somewhere safe, and the bed's better than the floor." "Why?" The word came out sharp, almost accusing. "Why what?" "Why buy? Why marry?" Her English was better than he'd expected, the accent thick but the words clear. "Why any of this?" Caleb sat down heavily in the chair by the fire. That was the question, wasn't it? The one he'd been avoiding since the moment he opened his mouth in that crowd. "I don't know," he said finally. "Saw you standing there and thought—" He trailed off, searching for words that wouldn't come. "Thought it was wrong, what they were doing. Thought I should stop it. So you buy me instead. Yeah. That's not better." "I know." She studied him in the lamplight, and for the first time he saw something other than blankness in her face, a kind of weary anger, or maybe just weariness. "You want to leave? The door's right there," Caleb said. "I ain't stopping you. You want to stay? Stay. You want me to take you somewhere else? Tell me where, and I'll do it. But I spent every dollar I had buying that contract from Stannis, so if you're hoping I'll sell it to someone nicer, I can't. This is what there is." She looked at the door, then at the bed, then at him. "I stay," she said finally. "Tonight. We see about tomorrow." "Fair enough." She stood and walked to the bed, lowering herself onto it like she expected it to collapse. It held. She lay down on her side, facing the wall, the blanket clutched tight. Caleb banked the fire, blew out the lamp, and stretched out on the floor with his saddle blanket. The floorboards were hard and cold, but he'd slept on worse. Outside, the wind picked up. In the distance, thunder rumbled. "Caleb," she said into the darkness. "Yeah? You're a fool." He almost smiled. "I know." The storm broke an hour later, rain hammering the roof, wind screaming around the corners of the cabin. Caleb lay awake listening to it, thinking about the money he'd spent, the life he'd had before today, the complete absence of a plan for what came next. Somewhere in the darkness, Maylene breathed quietly, and Caleb wondered if she was awake too, wondering the same things. The rain stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the world clean and sharp-edged. Caleb woke to gray light filtering through the cabin's single window and the ache of a night spent on hard floor. He lay still for a moment, listening. The bed creaked. Footsteps, light and careful. The sound of the door opening. He sat up fast, reaching for the rifle that leaned against the wall beside him. But through the window he could see her, just standing on the porch, wrapped in the blanket, looking out at the wet landscape. Not running, just standing. He set the rifle down and got to his feet, joints protesting. His back felt like someone had driven nails into it. Maylene turned when he stepped outside. Her face was unreadable in the early light, but she'd pulled her white hair loose from the bun. It fell past her shoulders, making her look somehow younger and older at the same time. "Morning," Caleb said. She nodded once, then turned back to watch the sunrise starting to break over the eastern hills, pink and orange bleeding into gray. "You sleep?" "Some." Her voice was rough with disuse. "You?" "Some." They stood in silence. A crow called from somewhere in the distance. The smell of wet sage drifted up from the valley. "I need to check the creek," Caleb said finally. "Storm like that, sometimes it floods the lower pasture. You want to come, or you want to stay here?" She looked at him, then at the cabin behind them, then back at him, weighing something. I come. They walked down to the creek without talking. The ground was soft, muddy in places, and Maylene moved carefully, lifting her skirt just enough to keep it from dragging. She wore the same dark blue dress from yesterday, and in daylight Caleb could see how threadbare it really was, worn through at the elbows, hem coming loose in several places. The creek had swollen overnight, running fast and brown with runoff. It hadn't jumped its banks, but it was close. Caleb walked along the edge, checking for damage to the small levee he'd built last spring. "You do this alone?" Maylene asked. She'd stopped a few yards back, watching him work. "Usually. Big property for one person. It's not that big. 20 acres, most of it useless scrub." He bent down, reinforcing a weak spot with rocks. "Had help once. Don't anymore." She didn't ask what happened to the help, just stood there, arms wrapped around herself despite the blanket. When he finished with the levee, they walked back toward the cabin. Halfway there, Maylene stopped suddenly. "There." She pointed toward the barn. "Someone was here." Caleb followed her gaze. Fresh tracks in the mud, boot prints, headed up from the road to the barn and then away again. He'd been so focused on the creek he'd missed them. His hand went to the knife at his belt. "Stay behind me." They approached the barn slowly. The door stood slightly ajar, though Caleb was certain he'd latched it last night. He pushed it open with his boot, letting his eyes adjust to the dim interior. The horse nickered nervously in its stall. The cow was fine. Nothing seemed disturbed. But there on the workbench, weighted down with a rock, was a piece of paper. Caleb picked it up, angling it toward the light from the door. The handwriting was crude but readable. "Fool and his china doll. Good luck, you'll need it." No signature. Didn't need one. The message was clear enough. "What does it say?" Maylene asked from the doorway. "Nothing important." Caleb crumpled the paper and shoved it in his pocket. "Just someone with too much time and not enough sense." She looked at him like she knew he was lying but wasn't going to push it. Smart woman. They went back to the cabin. Caleb built up the fire and started coffee while Maylene sat at the table, watching him move around the small space. He was conscious of her eyes tracking everything, where he kept the food, how he worked the stove, where the knives were stored. "You know how to cook?" he asked, measuring out coffee grounds. "Yes." "You want to?" She hesitated. "This is test?" "No. I'm asking if you want to cook or if you want me to keep doing it. I don't care either way." "You don't care if wife cooks?" Caleb turned to look at her. "You ain't really my wife. We both know that. The paper from Stills doesn't change what this is." "Then what is this?" Good question. He'd been asking himself the same thing all night. "Don't know yet," he said honestly. "But I figure we can start with what it ain't. It ain't me giving you orders. It ain't you being a servant. It ain't—" He stopped, searching for words. "It ain't what Stannis had you doing before." Her expression shifted slightly, not quite softening, but the hard edge dulled just a fraction. "You don't know what Stannis had me doing." "I can guess." She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, Caleb thought she was going to walk out. Instead, she moved to the stove, taking over the coffee preparation with brisk, efficient movements. "I cook," she said. "You do other things, fair trade." "All right." She worked in silence, and Caleb stepped back to give her room. She found the cornmeal, the salt pork, a jar of preserves he'd forgotten was even there. Within 20 minutes, she'd produced corn cakes that were better than anything he'd made in months, and the coffee was actually drinkable instead of the bitter sludge he usually managed. They ate without talking. The food disappeared fast. Caleb hadn't realized how hungry he was, and Maylene ate with the same mechanical efficiency she'd shown last night. When they finished, she cleared the plates without being asked and started heating water for washing. "I need to go into town later," Caleb said. "Get some things." "You need anything?" She paused, hands in the wash water. "Fabric, thread, needle." "For what?" She gestured at her dress. "This won't last winter." He looked at the worn fabric, the careful patches. "All right, what else?" "Soap. Real soap, not lye." "Anything else?" She thought about it. "Shoes. Mine have holes." Caleb glanced down. She was barefoot and had been since yesterday. He hadn't noticed. The shoes, if she'd had any, must have been left behind somewhere in whatever chain of transactions had brought her to Stannis's wagon. I'll get shoes, he said. You know your size? Small. She held up one foot, narrow and pale against the rough floorboards. Very small. He nodded and stood. I'll be back before dark. You'll be all right here? She didn't answer immediately, looked around the cabin, at the door, the window, the rifle still leaning against the wall. I'll be all right, she said finally. Caleb took the horse and rode into town, the morning sun already climbing hot, despite last night's rain. The streets were quiet, just a few early risers and shop owners sweeping their porches. He tied up outside Morrison's and went in. Morrison looked up from his ledger, eyebrows rising. Well, didn't expect to see you back so soon. Figured you'd be holed up in that cabin, enjoying your, He stopped himself. Your wife. Need supplies. Sure you do. Morrison's expression was carefully neutral, but Caleb could see the curiosity there. What kind of supplies? Caleb rattled off the list. Morrison gathered items, making notes, his pencil scratching across paper. When Caleb got to shoes, Morrison stopped. What size? Small. Women's small. Morrison disappeared into the back room and returned with 3 boxes. Try these. If they don't fit, bring them back. Caleb added fabric to the pile, a sturdy wool blend that would hold up to winter, along with thread, needles, and a cake of lavender soap that cost more than he wanted to spend but less than fancy French-milled stuff Morrison kept for the wealthy ranchers' wives. That it? Morrison asked. Caleb looked at the pile, thought about the empty cabin, the bare shelves. You got any tea? Chinese tea or regular tea? Chinese. Morrison's mouth twitched. I got some black tea from San Francisco. Chinese writing on the tin, good enough? Good enough. Morrison added it to the order. When everything was tallied, the total came to more than Caleb had in his pocket. He'd have to come back with eggs or firewood or something to trade. Put it on credit, Morrison said before Caleb could speak. Pay me when you can. I don't take credit. You do now. Consider it a wedding present. Morrison started wrapping the purchases in brown paper. That woman all right? Why wouldn't she be? Caleb. Morrison stopped wrapping, met his eyes. I've known you 5 years. You're not cruel, but you're not exactly warm either. And she's been through hell. Anyone can see that. So I'm asking, is she all right? She's scared and angry and probably planning how to survive me, Caleb said flatly. But yeah, she's all right. Morrison studied him for a long moment, then went back to wrapping. Fair enough. You need help out there. You let me know. I won't need help. Let me know anyway. Caleb loaded the supplies into his saddlebags and was about to mount when he heard boots on the boardwalk behind him. Vance. He turned. Rourke Stannis stood there, thumbs hooked in his vest, that same showman's smile plastered on his face, but his eyes were cold. Stannis. Heard you actually went through with it. Married the old girl. Stannis shook his head, grinning. Got to admire the commitment, even if it is batshit insane. Caleb said nothing. She's settling in all right? Not giving you trouble? That's not your concern. Well, actually, it is. Stannis pulled out a cigar, took his time lighting it. See, I owned that contract for 8 months. Broke her in good. She knows how things work. You start going soft, treating her like a real wife instead of property, she'll take advantage. Trust me on that. Caleb's hand tightened on the saddle horn. We done here? Just offering friendly advice. Stannis blew smoke. You paid good money for obedience. Make sure you get what you paid for. I paid for a contract release. That's what I got. Did you read that contract? Because there's clauses in there, stipulations. She tries to run, you're liable. She breaks any laws, you're liable. She doesn't fulfill her labor obligations. She doesn't have labor obligations anymore. She's free to do what she wants. Stannis laughed, sharp and ugly. Free. That's rich. Vance, she's Chinese. She's a woman. She's 70 years old. Where exactly do you think she's going to go if she's free? What do you think happens to women like her without protection? He stepped closer, voice dropping. You think you're being kind, but you're not. You're just postponing the inevitable. Men like Crenshaw, they'll wait until you get bored or she gets difficult, and then they'll make their move. And when they do, that piece of paper you signed won't mean shit. Then I guess they better not make their move. Stannis studied him, the smile fading. You really gonna stand between them and what they want? If I have to. Why? What is she to you? Caleb mounted his horse, looking down at Stannis from the saddle. None of your business. He rode out before Stannis could respond, but he could feel the man's eyes on his back all the way to the edge of town. The ride home took longer than it should have. Caleb kept the horse at a steady walk, thinking about what Stannis had said. The man was an asshole, but he wasn't wrong about the basic facts. Maylene had no legal standing, no protection except what Caleb could provide. And Caleb was one man with more enemies than friends. When he got back to the cabin, Maylene was outside hanging laundry on a line he didn't remember stringing up. She'd washed their clothes from yesterday, plus the spare shirt he kept in the trunk, plus the dish towels. Everything flapped in the breeze, clean and dripping. She turned when she heard the horse. "You're back?" Said I would be. He dismounted, started unloading the saddlebags. "Got your supplies." She came over, wiping her hands on her skirt. When she saw the fabric, her expression changed. Not quite a smile, but something close to it. The first real emotion he'd seen cross her face that wasn't wariness or anger. "This is good," she said, running her fingers over the wool. "Strong. Figured you'd need warm." She found the soap next, held it up to her nose. Something in her shoulders relaxed. Then she saw the tea tin. She went very still. "What?" Caleb asked. "This is expensive." "It's just tea." "It's not just tea." She turned the tin over in her hands, reading the characters on the label. "This is good tea. Very good." "You don't want it? I'll take it back." "No." She clutched the tin to her chest, protective. "I want it." They carried everything inside. Maylene immediately sat down at the table with the fabric, measuring and calculating. Caleb watched her work for a moment, the way her gnarled fingers moved with surprising dexterity, planning cuts, figuring angles. "You need help?" "No, I do this." She glanced up. "You fix fence. I see from window. Post is loose, east side." She was right. The fence post had been wobbling for weeks. "Yeah, I'll get to that." "Do it now. I work here, you work there. Later we eat." It wasn't a suggestion. Caleb found himself grinning despite everything. "Yes, ma'am." He spent the afternoon resetting the fence post, digging out the old hole and sinking a new one deeper. Hard work, the kind that made his shoulders burn and his hands blister. But good work. Simple, direct, a problem with a solution. From inside the cabin, he could hear occasional sounds, the snip of scissors, Maylene humming something low and wordless. Not quite a song, more like a rhythm to work by. When the sun started dropping toward the horizon, he washed up at the pump and went inside. Maylene had laid out a new dress on the bed, or rather the pieces of one, cut and pinned, ready for sewing. She'd also made dinner, beans and salt pork, cornbread, and a pot of tea steaming on the table. "Sit," she said. He sat. She poured tea into the 2 tin cups, then settled across from him. They ate in silence at first, but it was different from the tense quiet of last night. More comfortable. Or maybe just less actively hostile. "The fence is fixed?" she asked. "Yeah." "Good. Tomorrow, roof. I see leak by chimney." Caleb nodded. "Tomorrow." She took a sip of tea, eyes closing briefly. When she opened them, she looked at him directly. "Why you do this?" "Fix the roof?" "All of it. Buying me. Bringing me here, spending money you don't have." She set down her cup. "You could have just walked away yesterday. Let them sell me to someone else. Why didn't you?" Caleb stared into his tea, watching the leaves settle at the bottom. "My wife and daughter died 3 years ago. House fire. I was in town buying supplies, came back to ashes." Maylene said nothing, just waited. "I spent a year not giving a damn about anything. Drinking, fighting, didn't matter. Figured I'd die too eventually. Then I stopped drinking and started working, but I still didn't care. Just went through the motions, day after day after day." He looked up at her. "Yesterday, when I saw you on that wagon, I cared. First time in 3 years. Don't know why, but I wasn't going to walk away from it." She absorbed this, face unreadable. "You think buying me brings them back?" "No." "You think it makes you a better person?" "No." "Then what?" "I think it's what I should have done, and I'm tired of not doing things I should do." Maylene picked up her cup again, cradling it in both hands. My husband died 40 years ago. Lung sickness. We had no children. I worked in laundry in San Francisco 20 years. Then laundry closed. I owed money. Bad people bought debt. Bought me. She took another sip. I've been property for a long time. Different owners. Some worse than Stannis, some better. All same in the end. You ain't property now. Yes, I am. You own contract. Burn the contract if you want. I don't care about it. She laughed, short and bitter. You think burning paper changes anything? Tomorrow, I'm still old Chinese woman in Wyoming with no money, no family, no way to survive alone. Paper or no paper, I need you. That's being property, just with better words. Caleb didn't have an answer for that. Because she was right. The power imbalance was real, undeniable. He could pretend it wasn't, could act like they were equals, but the facts didn't care about his intentions. So what do you want? He asked finally. I want to not be afraid all the time. I want to sleep without waking up to check if someone is standing over me. I want to eat without wondering if the food will be taken away as punishment. She met his eyes. I want to believe you when you say you won't hurt me. How do I prove that? Time. And not hurting me. Fair enough. They finished dinner. Maylene washed the dishes while Caleb banked the fire for the night. When she was done, she went to the bed and started to lie down, then paused. Where do you sleep tonight? Same as last night. Floor. Floor is hard. I've slept on worse. She looked at the bed, then at him, calculating something. Bed is big enough for two if you stay on your side. Caleb froze. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. I'm saying you can, if you want. She sat on the edge of the bed, started braiding her white hair. I'm old, not stupid. Floor will ruin your back, then you can't work. Then we both suffer. More practical if you sleep on bed. Maylene, I'm not offering anything except shared sleeping space. You understand? I understand. Then stop being foolish and get in bed. He hesitated for another moment, then grabbed his blanket from the floor and climbed onto the other side of the bed. It was narrow, just wide enough for two people if neither moved much. He lay on his back, stiff and awkward, acutely aware of the space between them. Maylene blew out the lamp. Darkness settled over the cabin. Caleb? Yeah? Thank you for the tea. You're welcome. He listened to her breathing slow and deepen, wondered if she'd actually sleep or if she'd lie awake watching him in the dark, wondered if she kept a knife under the pillow, just in case. Wouldn't blame her if she did. The floor would have been easier, less complicated. But she was right about it being practical. He closed his eyes and tried not to think about the last time he'd shared a bed with someone. Tried not to remember Sarah's warmth, the way she'd curl against him in winter. Tried not to feel like he was betraying her by lying here beside someone else. But the memories came anyway. They always did. Somewhere in the middle of the night, he woke to a sound. Took him a moment to place it, soft, muffled, barely audible. Crying. Maylene lay facing away from him, shoulders shaking slightly. She was trying to be quiet, trying not to wake him, but the bed was small and sound carried. Caleb stayed still. Didn't reach out, didn't speak. Just lay there in the dark and listened to an old woman cry for reasons he could only guess at. Eventually the crying stopped. Her breathing evened out. Whether she'd actually fallen asleep or was just pretending, he couldn't tell. He stared at the ceiling, watching shadows shift as clouds moved across the moon outside. Tomorrow he'd fix the roof. Tomorrow they'd figure out the next thing, and the thing after that. Tomorrow they'd keep building whatever this was, one day at a time. But tonight, they just survived each other's presence. It was enough. For now. The days fell into rhythm. Not comfortable, not easy, but steady. Caleb fixed the roof while Maylene sewed her new dress. He mended fences while she cooked. He chopped wood while she washed clothes. They moved around each other like dancers learning steps, careful not to collide. 3 weeks passed. Maylene still flinched when he moved too fast, still watched the road like she expected someone to come riding up with worse intentions than the last visitor. But she also started leaving the cabin door open during the day, started humming those wordless tunes while she worked, started correcting his cooking technique when he got it wrong. Not like that, she'd say, taking the spoon from his hand. Like this. You want flavor? Not charcoal. And he'd step back. Let her take over, learning despite himself. The new dress fit her well, Dark gray wool with a high collar, practical and warm. She'd even managed to fashion a second one from the leftover fabric, lighter weight for warmer days. When she wore them, she stood a little straighter, moved with slightly more confidence. Small changes, but Caleb noticed. He noticed other things, too. The way she'd set aside the best pieces of meat for him at dinner. How she'd started mending his shirts without being asked, patching the tears and worn spots with careful, invisible stitches. The morning he'd found his boots oiled and cleaned, set by the door. "You don't have to do that," he'd said. "I know. I did it anyway." It was a Thursday when Morrison rode out to the cabin, his wagon loaded with supplies Caleb hadn't ordered. Maylene saw him coming first, tensing at the window. "Someone's here." Caleb looked up from the harness he was repairing. "Morrison, from the store." "Why?" "Don't know." He went outside, Maylene following but staying on the porch, half hidden by the doorframe. Morrison pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, favoring his left leg like always. "Caleb." "Morrison, what's all this?" "Delivery." Morrison gestured to the wagon bed, sacks of flour, cornmeal, beans, coffee, more than Caleb could afford in a year. "Don't give me that look. It's already paid for." "I didn't pay for it." "Someone did." Morrison pulled out a slip of paper. "Anonymous donor. Left cash at the store, said to bring it out here. Enough for 3 months of supplies, maybe more." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I don't want charity." "Well, you're getting it, and before you get all prideful, think about who else lives here." Morrison glanced toward the porch, gave Maylene a small nod. "She looks better. Color in her face." Maylene didn't respond, but she'd stepped fully into view now, arms crossed. "Who left the money?" Caleb asked. "Told you. Anonymous." "Morrison, I don't know, Caleb. Honest truth. Someone slid an envelope under the door before I opened Wednesday morning. Cash and a note. That's all I got." He started unloading sacks and, "Help me with this or stand there looking suspicious. Your choice." Caleb grabbed a sack of flour. Between the two of them, they unloaded everything in 10 minutes. When they finished, Morrison pulled out his pipe and took his time lighting it. "Town's talking," he said finally. "Town's always talking." "True, but this is different." Morrison puffed smoke. "Some folks are impressed. Most folks think you've lost your mind, and a few folks, well, they're planning." "Planning what?" "Don't know exactly. But Stannis has been buying drinks at the saloon, talking about investment protection and contract law. Crenshaw's been around too, stirring things up." Morrison met his eyes. "You made them look foolish, Caleb. Men like that don't forget." "Let them plan." "I'm serious. You might want to think about keeping that rifle close." Caleb glanced back at the cabin. Maylene had disappeared inside, but he could see her shadow through the window, listening. "I appreciate the warning." It's more than a warning. It's... Morrison stopped, searching for words. "Look, I know you can handle yourself. But you're out here alone with an old woman, and they're in town with numbers and grudges. Math doesn't favor you." "I'll manage." Morrison shook his head. "Stubborn as ever. All right. But you need anything at all. You send word. There's a few of us who don't love Stannis' version of how this town should run." After Morrison left, Caleb found Maylene sorting the supplies in the cabin, her movements sharp and agitated. "What did he say?" she asked without looking up. "Nothing important." "Don't lie. I heard some. What are they planning?" Caleb leaned against the doorframe. "Morrison thinks Stannis might cause trouble." "Of course he will." She slammed a bag of beans onto the shelf. "Men like him always do. They can't stand losing, can't stand being made fun of." She turned to face him. "You should take me back to town, sell the contract to someone else, before this gets worse." "I'm not doing that." "Why not?" "You've been kind. You've fed me, clothed me, given me safety. That's more than most. But you don't owe me your life, Caleb. You don't owe me protection from angry men with guns." "Maybe I don't owe it, but I'm giving it anyway." "That's stupid." "Probably." She stared at him, frustration written across her weathered face. "You're going to get killed, over me, over someone who's not even really your wife, who you barely know, who will probably die in a few years anyway because I'm old, and that's what happens." Her voice cracked slightly. That's stupid and wasteful, and I won't allow it. You don't get to allow or not allow. It's my choice. Then make a better choice. The words hung between them, loud in the small cabin. Maylene's hands were shaking. Caleb realized this was the most emotion he'd seen from her. Not fear, not wariness, but actual anger. And underneath it, something else. Concern. Maybe even care. Why do you want me to give up on this? He asked quietly. Because people who don't give up on me end up hurt. That's how it works. She turned away, gripping the edge of the table. My husband, he tried to protect me when the debt collectors came. They beat him so badly he never recovered, died 2 months later. The woman who ran the laundry in San Francisco, she tried to help me escape after the business sold. They broke her hands. She can't work now, can't even hold chopsticks. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. I'm poisoned, Caleb. I ruin people who try to help me. He crossed the cabin, stopped just behind her. Didn't touch, but close enough she'd feel his presence. You didn't ruin them. The people who hurt them did. There's a difference. Not to the dead and broken. Maybe not, but I'm not planning on being either. She laughed, harsh and wet. Nobody plans on it. They stood like that for a long moment. Outside, wind moved through the sage. The horse whinnied in the barn. Normal sounds, ordinary life, completely at odds with the tension inside. I can shoot, Maylene said finally. Caleb blinked. What? I can shoot. Rifle, pistol, not great, but good enough. She turned to face him. In San Francisco, before the debt, I worked for white family. They taught me, said Chinese woman with gun was novelty, made them feel progressive. The bitterness in her voice was thick. So if you're going to be stupid about this, at least let me help. I'm not going to hide while you fight. Maylene, don't argue. You want me here, you take all of me. That includes the parts that know how to fight back. He studied her face, the set of her jaw, the fire in her dark eyes. This wasn't the silent, broken woman from the wagon. This was someone else entirely. Someone who'd been buried under fear and survival instinct, but was clawing her way back to the surface. All right, he said. Tomorrow I'll teach you where I keep everything, and we'll practice. She nodded once, satisfied. That night at dinner, Maylene made extra rice and set a bowl aside, covering it with a cloth. Caleb watched her, curious. What's that for? For later, in case someone comes and we can't cook. You really think they're coming? I think it's foolish not to prepare. She sat down across from him. In the camps, the smart ones always had food hidden, water too, and warm clothes. The ones who didn't prepare died first when trouble came. What camps? She picked up her chopsticks. She'd carved them herself from leftover wood and started eating. After my husband died, I couldn't pay rent. They put me in work camp, said I'd work off the debt. 10 years I was there. Caleb set down his fork. 10 years? Maybe longer. Hard to keep track. Every day the same. Laundry, sewing, cleaning. They fed us enough to work, nothing more. Some women died. Some escaped. I stayed because I didn't know where else to go. She took a bite of rice, chewed slowly. Stannis bought my contract from the camp, paid $50. I worked for him 8 months before he got bored and decided to sell me for profit. Did he? Caleb stopped, not sure how to ask. Hit me? Yes. Worse than hit? No. He liked to yell, liked to threaten, but mostly he was lazy. Easier to scare someone into obedience than actually enforce it. She looked at Caleb directly. Why you want to know? Because I want to understand what I'm asking you to stay for. You're not asking, I'm choosing. She set down her chopsticks. That's the difference. That's what you don't understand. I could leave. Door's right there. But I'm choosing to stay, choosing to fight, choosing this. First time in 20 years, I get to choose anything that matters. The next morning, Caleb showed her where he kept the weapons. 2 rifles, 1 pistol, ammunition in a locked box under the floorboards. He demonstrated loading and cleaning, let her handle each piece until she felt comfortable. This one, she said, picking up the smaller rifle. This is better for me. They practiced behind the cabin, setting up bottles on fence posts. Maylene's first shot went wide, the recoil nearly knocking her over. But her second was closer, and by the 10th she'd hit 2 bottles in a row. You weren't lying, Caleb said. I don't lie. She reloaded with practiced efficiency. I forget sometimes. I make mistakes. But I don't lie. They practiced until noon, then went inside for lunch. Maylene's shoulder would be bruised tomorrow. She was too small to absorb the rifle's kick easily, but she didn't complain. Just ate her food and immediately started cleaning the weapons, her hands steady and sure. That afternoon, while Caleb worked on winterizing the barn, a rider appeared on the road. Young man, maybe 20, on a gray mare. He stopped at the property line, made no move to come closer. Caleb straightened, hand drifting toward the rifle leaning against the barn wall. The rider cupped his hands around his mouth. "Message from town. Stannis wants to talk. Says come to the saloon tomorrow noon. Just talk. No trouble." "Tell Stannis I'm not interested," Caleb shouted back. "He said you'd say that. He also said to tell you it's about legal matters. The contract. Says it's in your interest to hear him out." Caleb's jaw clenched. "Tell him I'll think about it." The rider nodded and turned the mare around, heading back toward town at a trot. Maylene had come out of the cabin, the small rifle in her hands. "What does he want?" "To talk, supposedly." "You believe that?" "No." "Good." She lowered the rifle. "Because neither do I." They spent the evening preparing. Caleb checked the doors, made sure the windows could be barred from inside. Maylene cooked extra food, stored water in every container they had. They didn't discuss what they were preparing for, exactly. Didn't need to. When they went to bed that night, Caleb lay awake staring at the ceiling. Beside him, Maylene's breathing was too controlled to be natural sleep. "You awake?" he asked. "Yes." "You scared?" "Yes, you?" "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "Caleb?" "Yeah." "If they come, if it goes badly, don't try to save me. Save yourself." "Not gonna happen." "I'm serious. I'm old. I've lived. You're young. You could start over somewhere else." "Maylene." He turned his head to look at her in the darkness. "I'm not leaving you. I'm not trading you. I'm not giving up. So stop asking." "You're infuriating." "I know." She was quiet again, then, "Sarah was lucky to have you." The name hit him like a punch. He hadn't spoken it aloud since the funeral, hadn't let anyone else say it in his presence. "How do you know her name?" "Morrison told me when he came with supplies while you were moving the sacks. He said you lost your wife Sarah and daughter Emma. Said you haven't been the same since." Caleb's throat tightened. "He shouldn't have told you that." "Why not?" "It's the truth." "Because it's not." He stopped, swallowed hard. "It's not something I talk about." "I know, you don't talk about anything important. You just do things and hope they speak for you." Her voice was gentle, no mockery in it. "But sometimes words matter too." He didn't answer, couldn't. "You want to know what I think?" Maylene continued. "I think they would be proud of what you did, standing up in that crowd, refusing to walk away. That took courage. Or stupidity. Both things can be true." She shifted, turning toward him in the darkness. He could barely make out her profile. "Sarah and Emma died. That's terrible, unfair, the kind of pain that breaks people. But you're still here, still fighting, still caring about someone other than yourself. That matters. Doesn't bring them back. No, but it means their life with you meant something. Meant enough that you remember how to be a good man, even when it's hard." She reached out, her hand finding his in the darkness. Her fingers were cold, papery, impossibly fragile. "They taught you well." Caleb's eyes burned. He didn't cry. Hadn't cried since the funeral. Had learned to lock that down tight along with everything else. But his chest ached with the weight of it. "I'm sorry I couldn't save them," he said, the words barely audible. "I know." They lay like that, hands clasped, until sleep finally came. The next morning dawned cold and clear. Caleb woke to find Maylene already up, dressed in her gray wool dress, hair pulled back tight. She'd laid out his cleanest shirt and pants on the chair. "You're going to town?" she asked. "Don't see that I have much choice. If I don't go, Stannis will use it as excuse to come here." "Then I'm coming with you." "Maylene, don't argue. You go alone. You're vulnerable. You go with me, they have to think twice." I'm evidence you're doing right by the contract. Makes it harder for them to claim you're not. She picked up the small rifle, started loading it. Besides, I want to see Morrison. Trade eggs for thread. There was no point arguing when she got that look on her face. They loaded the wagon, Caleb driving, Maylin beside him with the rifle across her lap. The morning air was sharp, carrying the smell of coming winter. The ride into town was quiet. Maylin watched the landscape, her face unreadable. Once she pointed out a hawk circling overhead. Another time she commented on the quality of someone's fence line. Normal observations, but Caleb could feel the tension in her, coiled tight as a spring. Bitter Creek came into view just before noon. The street was busier than usual, more people than a Thursday normally drew. They lined the boardwalks, watching as Caleb's wagon rolled past. Some faces were curious, some hostile, a few sympathetic. Caleb pulled up outside Morrison's. You go in, trade your eggs. I'll handle Stannis. I'm coming with you. Maylin, I said I'm coming. She climbed down from the wagon, rifle still in hand. You want to be stupid alone, too bad. We're stupid together now. Despite everything, Caleb almost smiled. They walked together toward the saloon. The crowd parted, conversations dying as they passed. Caleb kept his hand near his knife, scanning faces for threats. Maylin walked beside him, back straight, chin up, looking nothing like the broken woman on the wagon a month ago. The saloon doors swung open before they reached them. Work Stannis stepped out, flanked by Crenshaw and two other men Caleb didn't recognize, all armed. Vance and the lovely Mrs. Vance. Stannis grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. Glad you could make it. I was beginning to think you didn't value honest conversation. Say what you need to say, Stannis. Direct. I like that. Stannis pulled out the contract, the same one Caleb had signed a month ago. Been doing some reading, and I've discovered something interesting. According to this document, you assumed all liabilities associated with the contracted party. That includes debts, legal obligations, and this is the fun part, restitution for damages. Caleb's stomach sank. What damages? Well, that's the question, isn't it? Stannis unfolded the paper with exaggerated care. See, when I owned her contract, I invested considerable resources. Food, shelter, clothing, medical treatment. Then you came along and terminated the arrangement before I could recoup those investments. In business, we call that breach of contract. I paid you $100. For the contract itself, sure, but not for the damages. Not for my lost investment and future profits. Stannis smiled. I calculate that at about, $300. The crowd had grown. At least 30 people now, watching the confrontation like it was theater. That's not how contracts work, Maylin said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. You sold at agreed price, no additional claims. Stannis' smile froze. The China doll speaks. How delightful. My name is Maylin, and I read contract too. No damage clause, just transfer of ownership. She looked at the crowd. He's lying, trying to steal more money. Stannis' face darkened. You calling me a liar, old woman? Yes. The word dropped like a stone into water, ripples spreading outward. Someone in the crowd laughed nervously. Crenshaw's hand moved toward his gun. Careful, Caleb said quietly, his eyes on Crenshaw. You draw that. This goes a different direction. Maybe it should. Crenshaw stepped forward. Maybe it's time we settled this properly. You insulted this whole town, Vance. Made fools of us. And for what? For her? He jabbed a finger toward Maylin. She's nothing. Property. Less than property. She's my wife. On paper, maybe. But we all know what this really is. You got yourself a slave, same as anyone else would have. Difference is, you're pretending it's something noble. Crenshaw spat in the dirt. Makes me sick. Caleb felt Maylin's hand on his arm, a warning. He ignored it, stepping forward to meet Crenshaw halfway. You want to settle this? Fine. But it's between you and me. Leave her out of it. Why? She's the problem. You're just the fool who bought her. Then I guess I'm the fool you have to deal with. Crenshaw moved first. Not for his gun. That would have been too quick, too final for what he wanted. Instead, he swung his fist, telegraphing it so badly that Caleb had time to step back and let it sail past his jaw. The crowd roared. Caleb didn't swing back, just kept his distance, hands loose at his sides. "That the best you got?" Crenshaw came at him again, this time connecting with Caleb's ribs. Pain bloomed sharp and immediate, stealing his breath. He stumbled back, and Crenshaw pressed the advantage, landing another hit to his stomach. Caleb went down on one knee, gasping. Through the noise of the crowd, he could hear Maylene shouting something, but the words were lost in the chaos. "Stay down," Crenshaw said, standing over him. "Make this easy." Caleb looked up at him, tasted blood in his mouth. "No." He surged upward, driving his shoulder into Crenshaw's gut. They went down together in the dirt, fists flying. Caleb wasn't a fighter, hadn't been in a real fight since before the war, but he was angry and desperate, and that counted for something. He got in a few solid hits before Crenshaw rolled him over, pinning him. "Enough!" Morrison's voice cut through the noise. The old shopkeeper stood on the boardwalk, shotgun in his hands. "That's enough, all of you!" Crenshaw climbed off Caleb, breathing hard. Caleb rolled to his side, spitting blood. "This ain't a schoolyard," Morrison continued, the shotgun steady in his grip, "and I won't have it turning into one." Crenshaw, back off. Stannis, take your manufactured grievance somewhere else. The rest of you, show's over. Stannis stepped forward, hands raised in mock surrender. "Easy, Morrison. We're just having a conversation about legal matters. No need for firearms. Legal matters don't involve beating a man in the street." He agreed to settle it, under duress. "That's not agreement. That's coercion." Morrison glanced at Caleb, who was pulling himself to his feet with Maylene's help. "You all right, Vance?" "Fine." Caleb wiped blood from his lip. "Just peachy." "Then take your wife and go home, before this gets worse." Stannis laughed. "Go home to what? You think this is over? You think running back to that cabin solves anything?" Caleb turned to face him, Maylene still gripping his arm. "What do you want, Stannis? Really want? Because this ain't about money or contracts. So what is it?" For the first time, Stannis's showman mask slipped. His expression went cold, calculating. "I want what I'm owed. Respect. Recognition that in this town my word means something. You made me look weak in front of everyone. Made them think they could challenge me, ignore my business, question my authority." He stepped closer. "So yeah, Vance, I want restitution. $300, or I take back what's mine." "She's not yours." "The law says otherwise. I got documentation, witnesses, legal standing. You got nothing but a piece of paper from a half-blind reverend." Stannis pulled out a pocket watch, checked the time. "I'm giving you 1 week. 7 days to come up with the money, or I file a complaint with the territorial marshal. And when he sees the contract, sees the clauses you violated, he'll rule in my favor. Then she comes back to me, and you get nothing but debt." Caleb's jaw clenched. "There's no marshal out here. Nearest law is 3 days' ride." "Then I guess you better start riding, or start paying." Stannis snapped the watch shut. 1 week, Vance. Clock's ticking." He turned and walked back into the saloon, Crenshaw and the others following. The crowd began to disperse, conversations resuming in hushed tones. Morrison lowered the shotgun, shaking his head. "You're in deep, Caleb." "I know." $300? You got that kind of money?" "No?" "Then what are you going to do?" Caleb looked at Maylene. Her face was pale but composed, and she still held the rifle like she knew how to use it. "Figure something out." They climbed back into the wagon without going to Morrison's store. The ride home was silent, tense. Maylene kept the rifle across her lap, watching the road behind them. When they reached the cabin, Caleb unhitched the horse and led it to the barn. His ribs ached where Crenshaw had hit him, and his lip was still bleeding sluggishly. Maylene followed him inside the barn, set the rifle against the wall. "Let me see," she said. "I'm fine." "Don't be stupid. Let me see." He sat on a hay bale while she examined the damage. Her fingers were gentle but thorough, probing his ribs, checking for breaks. When she pressed on his left side, he flinched. "Cracked, maybe. Not broken." She stepped back. "You'll live." "Good to know." "Caleb." Who? She waited until he looked at her. "We can't pay $300. "I know. And we can't run. They'll find us." "I know that too." "Then what?" He stared at the barn floor, at the scattered hay and dirt. "I don't know. I'm still working on it." She was quiet for a moment. There's another option. No. You don't know what I'm going to say. Yes, I do, and no. I'm not giving you back to him. It would solve everything. You'd be free. You'd what? Go back to being property? Go back to work camps and owners and being sold off whenever someone got bored? He stood, ignoring the pain in his ribs. That's not happening. Then we fight. Against how many? Stannis has money, connections, men willing to do whatever he asks. We have a rifle and stubborn pride. And each other, Maylene said quietly. That counts for something. Caleb looked at her, really looked. The woman who'd been silent and terrified on that wagon was gone, replaced by someone harder, sharper, someone who'd survived worse than Rourke Stannis and wasn't about to give up now. Yeah, he said, it does. They went back to the cabin. Maylene made tea while Caleb tried to think through their options. None of them were good. They could try to gather the money, sell everything they had, beg loans from anyone who'd listen. But even liquidating every asset wouldn't get them close to $300, and they'd be left with nothing to survive the winter. They could leave, pack up and run, head to Montana or Colorado, disappear into another territory. But running meant abandoning the cabin, the land, everything Caleb had built, and there was no guarantee they wouldn't face the same problems elsewhere. Or they could stay and fight, hope that Stannis was bluffing, that the territorial marshal would see through the manufactured claim, that justice would somehow prevail. The last option seemed the least likely. I could ride to the marshal, Caleb said, thinking out loud. Explain the situation. Show him the marriage certificate. Prove she's my wife, not my property. Stannis has the original contract, with all his clauses and claims. Maylene poured tea, her movements precise. And you're nobody. No reputation, no standing, no reason for the marshal to believe you over a successful businessman. So we just wait for them to come take you? No. We prepare. She set a cup in front of him. If they come, we make it cost them. Make it so difficult, so dangerous, that even if they win, they lose. Caleb took a sip of tea, considering. You're talking about violence. I'm talking about survival. Same thing sometimes. He thought about his wife and daughter, about the fire that took them. He'd been in town buying supplies, useless and absent when they needed him most. He'd promised himself afterward that he'd never fail to protect someone again, never stand by while people he cared about suffered. And despite everything, the short time, the strange circumstances, the impossible situation, he realized he cared about Maylene, not the way he'd loved Sarah, but something real nonetheless. Partnership, maybe. Mutual respect, the kind of bond forged in shared adversity. All right, he said, we prepare. But we also look for another way. Maybe there's someone who can help, someone with influence. Like who? Don't know yet. But Morrison said there were others who didn't love Stannis' version of how things should run. Maybe we find those people. Build alliances. Maylene nodded slowly. It's worth trying. But Caleb, we only have a week. Then we better move fast. Over the next 3 days, Caleb made quiet visits to the neighboring ranches. The Hendersons to the north, the Yamaguchi family to the east, a widow named Eliza Thorne, who ran her late husband's spread to the south. He explained the situation, asked for support, testimony, witnesses, anything that might help their case. Most refused, didn't want to get involved, didn't want to cross Stannis. The Hendersons were polite but firm. The Yamaguchis sympathetic but powerless. They were Japanese immigrants themselves, barely tolerated by the town. Getting involved in someone else's fight would only paint targets on their backs. But Eliza Thorne listened. She was in her 50s, weathered and tough, running a cattle operation with just 3 hired hands. When Caleb finished explaining, she poured him coffee and thought for a long minute. Stannis has been a problem for years, she said finally. Bought up half the freight contracts, controls who ships what and when. He's been trying to squeeze me out, make me sell to him at pennies on the dollar. She sipped her coffee. I can't testify on your behalf. I got no standing in this. But I can make noise. Talk to the other ranchers, spread word about what he's really doing. That could put you at risk. I'm already at risk. Woman running a ranch alone, Stannis sees that as opportunity. He's been waiting for me to fail. She smiled grimly. I don't plan on giving him the satisfaction. Caleb rode back to the cabin with the first ember of hope he'd felt in days. It wasn't much. One ally, some promised noise-making, but it was something. When he got home, he found Maylene in the barn, working on something he couldn't quite make out in the dim light. As he got closer, he realized she'd been fashioning weapons. Sharpened stakes from fence posts, a club reinforced with iron bands, even a crude sling made from leather straps. "Planning a siege?" he asked. "Planning for possibility." She didn't look up from her work. "How many friends did you find?" "One, maybe. Eliza Thorne." "The widow? You know her?" Morrison mentioned her, said she's tough. Maylene tested the weight of the club. One is better than none. That night, they ate dinner in near silence. The tension was building. 4 days left on Stannis's deadline, and they were no closer to a solution. Caleb tried to think of other options, other angles, but kept coming up empty. After dinner, Maylene cleared the table and pulled out the marriage certificate Reverend Stills had given them. She studied it in the lamplight, tracing the words with one finger. "This is real," she said. "Legal and binding. That should count for something." "Should. But Stannis has older documents. And like you said, he has standing. I don't." "Then we change that." She looked up at him. "We make you matter. Make you someone the Marshal can't ignore." "How?" "I don't know yet." She folded the certificate carefully. "But there has to be a way." They went to bed still searching for answers. Caleb lay awake, listening to the night sounds, wind in the eaves, the horse shifting in the barn, Maylene's quiet breathing beside him. She'd stopped flinching when he moved in his sleep, stopped watching him with that constant wariness. Small victories, meaningless if Stannis won. "You still awake?" Maylene whispered. "Yeah. I've been thinking about the contract Stannis has." "What about it?" "He said there are clauses, damage provisions, liability transfers, things you agreed to when you signed." She turned toward him in the darkness. "But contracts can be challenged, especially if they contain illegal terms." Caleb propped himself up on one elbow. "What kind of illegal terms?" "Indentured servitude is technically legal in territories, but only under specific conditions. Has to be voluntary, has to have clear end date, can't be transferred without consent." Her voice picked up speed, thinking through it. "If Stannis' original contract with me didn't meet those conditions, then the whole thing is void, which means your contract, buying a void contract, is also void. Can you prove the original contract was illegal?" "I never signed anything, never agreed to any terms. Stannis just bought my debt and claimed ownership." She sat up. "That's not legal indentured servitude. That's slavery. And slavery is illegal, even in territories." Hope flickered, dangerous and fragile. "You sure about this?" "No, but it's worth investigating. Morrison might know someone, a lawyer maybe, or someone who understands territorial law. Lawyers cost money we don't have. Then we find someone who'll work for other reasons. Revenge, maybe, or principle." She grabbed his hand in the darkness. "This might be our chance, Caleb. Our only chance." The next morning they rode to town together. Morrison was sweeping his porch when they arrived, and he set down the broom when he saw their faces. "What happened?" "We need help," Caleb said. "Legal help. Someone who knows contract law." Morrison scratched his jaw. "There's a man in Rawlins, name's Theodore Marsh. Worked as a territorial prosecutor before he retired. Now he takes cases that interest him." "What interests him?" "Beating people he doesn't like, and he despises Stannis." Morrison leaned against the porch rail. "Stannis tried to bribe him 5 years back, get a favorable ruling on a freight dispute. Marsh not only refused, he made sure everyone knew about the attempt. Stannis has hated him ever since." "Will he help us?" Maylene asked. "Might. If you can prove Stannis did something illegal." Morrison looked between them. "Can you?" "Maybe," Caleb said. "If Maylene's right about the original contract." Morrison thought for a moment, then nodded. "Rawlins is 2 days' ride. You want me to send word ahead? Let Marsh know you're coming?" "Yes. And Morrison, if Stannis asks where we went, I'll tell him you left territory, headed for Colorado." Morrison smiled slightly. "Buy you some time." They rode out that afternoon, pushing hard to make distance. The landscape rolled past, sage flats giving way to rocky hills, then forest as they climbed into higher country. They camped that night beside a creek, no fire, eating cold food and taking turns on watch. "You think this will work?" Maylin asked during Caleb's watch shift. "Don't know, but it's better than waiting for Stannis to come take you." "If it doesn't work, if Marsh can't help, what then?" Caleb checked the rifle's load for the third time. "Then we go home, and we make our stand. And whatever happens, happens." She was quiet for a while, then, "I'm not sorry for any of this." "For what?" "For saying yes when you offered your hand, for staying, for choosing this." She pulled her blanket tighter. "Even if it ends badly, I'm not sorry." "Me neither." They reached Rollins by mid-afternoon the next day. It was bigger than Bitter Creek, an actual town with paved streets, brick buildings, even a telegraph office. Morrison's message had arrived ahead of them, and Theodore Marsh's office was easy to find. The man himself was older than Caleb expected, maybe 70, with white hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. His office was cramped, every surface covered in books and papers, but immaculately organized. "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance!" Marsh gestured to chairs. Morrison's telegram was sparse on details. Something about Rourke Stannis and contract disputes. Caleb laid out the whole story. The auction, the marriage, Stannis's claims, the deadline. Marsh listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When Caleb finished, Marsh turned to Maylin. "You never signed a contract with Stannis?" "No, never signed anything." "And you were held against your will, forced to work without compensation?" "Yes." Marsh made another note. "That's slavery, not indentured servitude, which means any subsequent contract built on that foundation, including Mr. Vance's purchase, is legally void." He looked up. "The problem is proof. Stannis will claim you signed something, that you agreed to terms. It's your word against his, and he has better standing." "What if we had witnesses?" Maylin asked. "Other people he did this to?" "That would help, but finding them, getting them to testify, that takes time you don't have." Marsh leaned back in his chair. "However, there might be another angle. Stannis filed documents when he bought your debt. Those documents should be on record at the territorial office. If they don't meet legal requirements for indentured servitude, and I suspect they don't, we can challenge the entire chain of ownership." "How long would that take?" Caleb asked. "To file the challenge? 2 days. To get a hearing? 2 weeks, maybe 3. We don't have that long. Stannis gave us a week, and we're down to 3 days." Marsh removed his spectacles, cleaned them with a handkerchief. "Then we file for an emergency injunction. Freeze the contract dispute until the court can review the underlying documents." He replaced the spectacles. "It's a long shot. The territorial judge might not grant it, but it's the best option you have." "What do you need from us?" Maylin asked. "Your marriage certificate, any correspondence from Stannis, and your testimony under oath about how you came to be in his possession." Marsh pulled out fresh paper. "We'll draft the injunction tonight, file it tomorrow morning. With luck, we'll have an answer by the time your deadline expires." They spent the rest of the day preparing documents. Marsh was thorough, asking detailed questions, documenting everything. By evening, they had a thick stack of papers, affidavits, statements, legal arguments. "This is good work," Marsh said, reviewing the final drafts. "Strong case. But Caleb, you should know, even if we win the injunction, even if we invalidate the contracts, Stannis won't accept it gracefully. Men like him don't." "I know." "You prepared for what comes next?" Caleb thought about the weapons Maylin had made, the rifle practice, the mental preparation they'd both been doing. "As prepared as we can be." Marsh nodded. "Then I'll see you in court, figuratively speaking." They left Rollins at first light the next morning, riding hard for Bitter Creek. The deadline was tomorrow at noon, less than 30 hours. The injunction would be filed by now, but there was no way to know if it had been granted. No telegraph lines out to the cabin, no way to get word. They arrived home just after dark, exhausted and sore from 2 days of hard riding. The cabin was exactly as they'd left it, undisturbed, but there was something off about the silence, too quiet, too still. Caleb dismounted carefully, rifle in hand. "Stay behind me." They approached the cabin slowly. The door was closed, no light inside. Caleb pushed it open with his boot, weapon ready. Empty, but not untouched. Someone had been inside. Papers scattered across the table, drawers pulled open, their belongings rifled through, searching for something, though what? Caleb couldn't guess. They were here, Maylene said, her voice tight. Looking for evidence, maybe. Or just sending a message. Caleb checked the rest of the cabin. Nothing taken, nothing broken, just the clear violation of their space, their privacy. He found a note on the table, weighted down with a rock. Tomorrow at noon, come to town or we come to you. Stannis. Maylene read over his shoulder. He doesn't know about the injunction. Not yet, but he will soon. Caleb crumpled the note. Question is whether it'll matter. They spent the night preparing. Maylene cooked extra food, packed supplies they could grab quickly if they needed to run. Caleb cleaned the weapons, checked ammunition, reinforced the door and window shutters. They worked in tense silence, both knowing tomorrow would bring a reckoning one way or another. When they finally went to bed, neither could sleep. They lay in the darkness, hands clasped, listening to every sound outside. Caleb? Yeah? If this goes wrong, if they take me, I want you to know something. She squeezed his hand. You gave me back my life. Maybe only for a few weeks, but that's more than I had. More than I thought I'd ever have again. Thank you. His throat tightened. We're not done yet. I know, but just in case. He rolled toward her, found her face in the darkness. Maylene, listen to me. I'm not letting them take you. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. No surrender, no giving up. You hear me? I hear you. Good. Now try to sleep. We're going to need our strength. But neither of them slept. They lay awake until the first gray light of dawn crept through the window, both knowing that in a few hours, everything would change. The sun climbed slow that morning, like it knew what was coming and wanted to delay it. Caleb stood on the porch, watching the eastern sky turn from gray to pink to pale blue, the rifle cradled in his arms. Behind him, inside the cabin, he could hear Maylene moving around, the clink of dishes, water being poured, the scrape of a chair. She came out carrying 2 cups of coffee, handed him one without speaking. They stood side by side, drinking, watching the empty road. What time is it? She asked. Caleb checked the sky. Maybe 8. We got 4 hours. You think they'll wait until noon? Stannis likes his theater. He'll wait. Caleb took another sip of coffee, bitter and strong. Question is whether the injunction came through. And if it didn't, then we handle it. Maylene nodded slowly. She'd braided her white hair tight against her head, wore the gray wool dress and sturdy boots. Battle dress, in its way. She looked small standing there, fragile, but Caleb had learned not to mistake her size for weakness. I should check the barn, he said. Make sure the horse is ready in case we need to move fast. I'll watch the road. He went to the barn, fed and watered the horse, checked the saddle and tack. Everything was ready. He'd packed emergency supplies in the saddlebags 2 days ago. Food, water, ammunition, the marriage certificate wrapped in oilcloth. If they had to run, they could be gone in 5 minutes. When he came back to the cabin, Maylene was still on the porch, the small rifle now resting across her lap. She'd positioned herself where she could see the road in both directions, her back to the wall. Anything? Caleb asked. Dust, far out. Could be wind, could be riders. He looked where she was pointing, a faint smudge on the horizon, too far to make out details. How long? Hour, maybe less if they're pushing. They went inside. Caleb barred the door, checked the window shutters. Maylene gathered the weapons they'd prepared, the stakes, the club, kitchen knives sharpened to points. She arranged them within easy reach, methodical and calm. You scared? Caleb asked. Terrified. You? Yeah. She almost smiled. Good. Means we're not stupid. They waited. The dust cloud grew closer, resolving into shapes. 4 riders, maybe 5. Caleb's stomach tightened. He'd hoped for fewer, maybe just Stannis and Crenshaw coming to talk, but 5 meant they'd brought backup, meant they expected trouble. Get ready, he said. Maylene moved to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. 5 riders. I see Stannis, Crenshaw, 3 others, I don't know. Armed? All of them. Caleb positioned himself by the door, rifle ready. His hands were steady, but his mouth was dry. He'd been in the war, seen combat, killed men who were trying to kill him. But this was different. This was personal. This was about protecting someone who'd become more important than he'd planned on. The riders stopped about 30 yards out, just beyond easy rifle range. Smart. They knew Caleb could shoot, weren't about to make themselves targets. Stannis dismounted, handed his reins to one of the others. He walked forward alone, hands visible and empty, that showman's smile firmly in place. "Vance, you in there?" Caleb didn't answer. "I know you are. Saw you on the porch earlier." Stannis stopped about 20 yards out. "It's noon. Time to settle accounts." "We got nothing to settle," Caleb shouted back. "The contract says otherwise. $300 or the woman comes with me." "She's my wife. You got no claim." Stannis laughed. "Wife on paper, maybe. But we both know what this really is. You bought property, Vance. Property I'm entitled to reclaim for damages." Maylene touched Caleb's arm. "Let me talk to him." "No. He wants to see me scared. Wants to see me broken." She moved toward the door. "Let me show him something else." Before Caleb could stop her, she unbarred the door and stepped outside. Caleb followed immediately, rifle raised, putting himself between her and the riders. Stannis' smile widened. "There she is, looking better than when I had her. Guess you've been feeding her regular." "I want to see the contract," Maylene called out. "The original one, from when you bought my debt." Stannis' expression flickered, just for a moment, surprise or maybe concern. "Why would you want to see that?" "Because I never signed it, never agreed to any terms. Which means you didn't own me, which means Caleb didn't buy anything real, which means you got no claim." She took a step forward. "Show me the document. Prove I'm wrong." "I don't have to prove anything to you." "Because you can't. Because you know it's illegal." Another step. "You bought stolen property, Stannis. Human property. That's slavery, and slavery is illegal even here." The men behind Stannis shifted nervously. Crenshaw said something too quiet to hear. Stannis waved him off, but his smile was gone now. "Careful, old woman. You're making accusations you can't back up." "Try me." The standoff held for a long moment. Then new dust appeared on the road, more riders coming fast from town. Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. If this was reinforcements for Stannis, they were finished. But as the riders got closer, he recognized Morrison's wagon in front, and behind it 2 men on horseback. One wore a badge on his vest. The marshal. Morrison pulled up beside Stannis' group, climbed down with his usual stiffness. "Morning, Rourke. Didn't expect to find you out here." Stannis recovered quickly, the smile snapping back into place. "Just conducting business, Morrison. Nothing that concerns you." "Actually, it might." The man with the badge dismounted, tall, maybe 50, with gray at his temples and tired eyes. "I'm Marshal Hendricks, Territorial Authority. Got an interesting filing crossed my desk this morning. Emergency injunction in the matter of Vance versus Stannis regarding disputed property claims." He pulled papers from his coat. "Says here you're trying to reclaim a person as property, Mr. Stannis. That true?" "I'm reclaiming a contracted laborer who never signed a contract." Hendricks unfolded the papers. "According to these documents, you purchased a debt and claimed ownership of a person without their consent, without legal process, without any of the requirements for legitimate indentured servitude." He looked up. "That's called slavery, Mr. Stannis. And I take a dim view of slavery." Stannis' face went red. "That's not... I have documentation. The Territorial Office approved. The Territorial Office approved a transfer of debt, not ownership of a person. Big difference." Hendricks walked past Stannis, approached Caleb and Malin. "You two the Vances?" "Yes, sir," Caleb said. "You married legal?" "Yes, sir. Got the certificate." "And ma'am, you married him willingly? No coercion?" Malin met the marshal's eyes. "I married him willingly. He's been kind. Hasn't hurt me, hasn't forced me, has treated me with more respect than any owner ever did." Hendricks nodded, made a note. "That's good enough for me. The injunction is granted pending full review, which will happen in Rawlins 2 weeks from now. Until then, Mrs. Vance remains with her husband, and Mr. Stannis makes no further contact or claims." He turned back to Stannis. That clear? This is ridiculous. I paid good money for a fraudulent contract, which means you're out the money. And lucky I'm not charging you with human trafficking. Hendrix's voice went hard. I've been hearing stories about you, Stannis, about how you do business. This injunction gives me reason to look deeper into those stories. I were you, I'd be real careful about pushing this further. Stannis looked like he wanted to argue, but the other riders were already backing away. Even Crenshaw looked uncertain. Going up against a marshal was different than intimidating a lone homesteader. This isn't over, Stannis said, his voice low and dangerous. Yes, it is. Hendrix folded the papers. And if you come out here again, if you so much as look at these folks wrong, I'll arrest you for harassment and whatever else I can make stick. Now get out of here before I change my mind about being lenient. Stannis stared at Caleb for a long moment, then at Maylene. Whatever he saw in their faces made him spit in the dirt and turn away. He mounted his horse, jerked the reins hard, and rode off. The others followed, raising a cloud of dust that hung in the still air. When they were gone, Caleb's knees nearly buckled. He'd been holding tension for so long that releasing it felt almost painful. Maylene grabbed his arm, steadying him. You all right? She asked. Yeah. Morrison walked over, grinning. Told you there were people who didn't love Stannis's way of doing things. Marshal Hendrix is one of them. When Theodore Marsh filed that injunction, Hendrix rode out from Cheyenne himself to serve it. Hendrix joined them, tucking the papers back into his coat. Mr. Marsh is a friend of mine. When he sends me a case, I pay attention. He looked at Maylene. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to testify at the hearing in 2 weeks. Can you do that? Yes. It won't be easy. Stannis will have lawyers, will try to make you look like a liar, or worse. You prepared for that? I've survived worse than lawyers. Hendrix almost smiled. I believe it. All right, I'll see you both in Rawlins. And Mr. Vance, keep that rifle handy. Stannis strikes me as the type who doesn't take defeat gracefully. After the marshal and Morrison left, Caleb and Maylene stood in the yard for a long time, neither quite believing what had just happened. The morning that had started with such tension and fear had ended with something close to victory. We won, Maylene said, like she was testing the words. For now. For now is enough. She turned to him. We won, Caleb. He found himself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in longer than he could remember. Yeah, we did. The 2 weeks until the hearing passed in a strange mixture of normalcy and anticipation. They fell back into their routines. Caleb working the land, Maylene cooking and sewing, both of them keeping watch for trouble that never came. Stannis stayed in town, and if he was planning anything, he kept it quiet. Theodore Marsh visited twice, preparing them for testimony, explaining court procedures, asking questions that made Caleb uncomfortable but which Maylene answered with steady clarity. She remembered dates, names, details from her years in the work camps and under Stannis' ownership, built a case brick by brick. You're going to be a strong witness, Marsh told her after the second visit. Stannis' lawyers will try to rattle you, but I don't think they'll succeed. They won't, Maylene said simply. The day of the hearing, they rode to Rawlins together. The courtroom was in a brick building on the main street, larger and more imposing than anything in Bitter Creek. They arrived early, found seats on a hard bench outside the courtroom. Stannis showed up with 2 lawyers in expensive suits, looking confident and comfortable. When he saw Caleb and Maylene, he didn't acknowledge them, just walked past like they didn't exist. Arrogant, Maylene muttered. Good. Arrogant makes mistakes. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Stannis' lawyers argued contract law, property rights, legitimate business practices. They painted Maylene as an ungrateful laborer who'd violated her obligations, painted Caleb as a naive fool who'd interfered in legal commerce. Then Theodore Marsh stood up. He was methodical, devastating, walked the judge through every requirement for legal indentured servitude, showed how Stannis had violated each one, produced witnesses, women who'd also been owned by Stannis, who told stories of abuse and exploitation, brought up Stannis' own business records, which showed he'd been buying and selling people like livestock for years. When Maylene took the stand, she spoke clearly and without emotion, described the work camps, the debt purchase, the years of forced labor, explained how she'd never signed anything, never agreed to any terms, had been property by force, not by choice. Stannis's lawyers tried to break her testimony, asked hostile questions, implied she was lying. She didn't flinch, didn't waver, just answered each question with calm precision, her small frame radiating a dignity that filled the room. When she stepped down, Caleb saw tears on more than one face in the gallery. The judge, an older man with white whiskers and spectacles, didn't take long to deliberate. He reviewed the documents, asked a few clarifying questions, then delivered his ruling. The original debt purchase violated multiple provisions of territorial law regarding indentured servitude. The contract is void ab initio, invalid from the beginning. Mr. Stannis has no claim to Mrs. Vance, had no right to sell any such claim, and Mr. Vance's purchase was of a contract that legally never existed. He looked at Stannis. You're fortunate I'm not pursuing criminal charges, Mr. Stannis, but I'm putting you on notice. Any similar business practices come to my attention again. You'll face the full weight of the law. He banged his gavel. Case dismissed. Mrs. Vance is free, and her marriage to Mr. Vance is recognized as legitimate and binding. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Stannis stood frozen, his face purple with rage. His lawyers gathered papers quickly, clearly wanting to leave before their client did something stupid. Theodore Marsh shook Caleb's hand, then Maylin's. Congratulations. You're legally free, both of you. Outside the courthouse in the afternoon sun, Maylene stopped on the steps and turned her face up to the sky. She stood like that for a long moment, eyes closed, breathing deep. What are you doing? Caleb asked. Remembering what freedom feels like. They rode home slowly, no rush, enjoying the cool air and the changing colors of the landscape as fall deepened toward winter. When they reached the cabin, it looked different somehow, more solid, more permanent. Like it had been just a place before, but now it was something else. Home. Over the following months, life settled into something Caleb hadn't experienced since before the fire. Not the same as what he'd had with Sarah and Emma. That was gone, and he'd made peace with its absence. But this was good in its own way. Different, but good. Maylene transformed the cabin inch by inch. She sewed curtains for the windows, wove a rug from scrap fabric, planted herbs in pots that she kept on the windowsill through winter. She taught Caleb to cook properly, with spices and technique instead of just heat and hoping. She told stories while they worked, about her childhood in China before her family emigrated, about San Francisco in its early days, about the people she'd known and lost. And slowly, carefully, Caleb told his stories too, about Sarah and Emma, about the fire, about the years of wandering afterward. Maylene listened without judgment, without offering platitudes or false comfort, just listened, and somehow that was enough. Winter came hard that year, snow piled deep around the cabin, and temperatures dropped low enough to freeze the water in the bucket overnight. But the cabin stayed warm, the food held out, and they had each other. One night in January, after dinner, Maylene set down her tea and looked at Caleb across the table. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About names. When I came here, I had nothing. No money, no possessions, no real name. Just Maylene, which could have been anyone. But now I'm Maylene Vance. That means something." Caleb wasn't sure where she was going. "It's a good name. It's your name, Sarah's name, Emma's name." She traced patterns on the table with one finger. "I want you to know I'm not trying to replace them. I couldn't if I wanted to. But I'm honored to carry the name. Honored to be part of what you built, even if I came into it sideways and late." His throat tightened. "You're not late. You're right on time." She smiled, that rare full smile that transformed her weathered face. "Good. Because I'm not going anywhere." "Good." Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting in patches, revealing brown grass that would green up once the warmth really took hold. Caleb and Maylene worked together to prepare the garden, a bigger one this year with space for vegetables and flowers both. Maylene wanted flowers, said the cabin needed beauty, not just function. Word had spread about the hearing, about Stannis's defeat. The town treated Caleb differently now, not friendly exactly, but respectful. People nodded when he passed. Shopkeepers gave fair prices. No one made jokes about his Chinese wife. Stannis himself had disappeared. sold his freight business and left the territory, some said for California, others for Montana. Wherever he'd gone, he wasn't coming back. Eliza Thorne stopped by one afternoon in April, her wagon loaded with seed and starter plants. "Thought you might could use these," she said, climbing down. "Got extra, and it seems a shame to waste them." Maylene came out to see, her face lighting up when she saw the plants. "This is too much." "It's not enough, but it's what I got." Eliza handed over a flat of seedlings. "You two did something important, stood up when most folks would have folded. That matters. We just fought for ourselves," Caleb said. "That's how it starts. But people are paying attention now, asking questions about other contracts in the territory, other arrangements that don't sit right." Eliza smiled. "You started something. Might as well see it through." After she left, Maylene planted the seedlings carefully, talking to each one as she set it in the soil. Caleb watched from the porch, drinking coffee, feeling something like contentment settle over him. "What are you smiling at?" Maylene called over. "Nothing, everything, don't know." She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "You're getting soft in your old age." "I'm 34. Ancient." She climbed the porch steps, sat beside him. "But I like you soft. Better than hard and angry." "I was never angry." "Yes, you were. When I first came here, you were so angry you couldn't see straight. Just hid it under silence and work." She took his coffee cup, stole a sip. "You're better now. Lighter." He thought about that. Maybe she was right. The weight he'd carried since the fire, guilt, grief, rage at the unfairness of it all, hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, become something he could live with instead of something that crushed him. "You helped," he said. "We helped each other. That's how it works." Summer brought heat and hard work. They harvested the garden, preserved what they could, sold the extra at the market Morrison had started in town. Maylene's vegetables were popular, crisp and flavorful in ways people weren't used to. She taught some of the other women her techniques, shared seeds, built relationships. The cabin expanded. With money from the garden sales and Caleb's continued work for the ranches, they added a second room, a small space that Maylene claimed for sewing and storage. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress, like building towards something instead of just surviving. One evening in late August, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. The air smelled like sage and coming rain. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd walked away that day?" Maylene asked. "Sometimes." "What do you think?" Caleb considered. "I think I'd still be alone. Still angry. Still waiting to die without really living. And me? You'd probably be dead. Or broken. Or both." She nodded slowly. "Probably, so we saved each other." "Guess so. That's rare, you know. Most people go through life alone, even when they're surrounded by others. Truly saving each other, that's rare." He reached over, took her hand. Her fingers were rough with calluses, cool in the evening air. "I'm glad I didn't walk away." "Me too." The rain started just before full dark, a steady downpour that drummed on the roof and filled the water barrels. They went inside, and Maylene made tea while Caleb built up the fire. They'd done this 100 times now, these small domestic rituals, and they'd do it 100 more. "Caleb?" Maylene said from the stove. "Yeah?" "I'm happy. I wanted you to know that. For the first time in 20 years, I'm actually happy." He looked at her. This small, tough woman who'd survived things that would have broken most people, who'd chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier, who'd fought beside him when fighting seemed hopeless. "Me too," he said. "Me too." The years rolled on. They grew older together, Caleb's dark hair going gray at the temples, Maylene's white hair thinning but never quite disappearing. The cabin became a landmark. People would say, "Head out past the Vance place," when giving directions. The garden became famous in its small way, Maylene's techniques adopted by farmers throughout the territory. They had hard times, winters that were brutal, summers that were dry, illness that laid them both low for weeks. But they weathered each storm together, neither giving up, both committed to the life they'd built. On a cool October morning, 7 years after the hearing, Caleb woke to find Maylene already up, standing at the window watching the sunrise. She was 78 now, more fragile than she'd been, but still fierce in her own way. You all right? He asked. I'm perfect. She turned, smiling. Absolutely perfect. What's the occasion? No occasion, just life. She came to sit on the edge of the bed. I was thinking about that day, when you reached up to help me down from the wagon. I remember. I almost didn't take your hand. Almost ran right there, despite having nowhere to go. Do you know why I took it? Why? Because your eyes were sad. Really, truly sad. And I thought, this man knows pain. Real pain. Not the fake kind people pretend to understand, so maybe he won't add to mine. She touched his face gently. I was right. I'm glad you took my hand. So am I. They spent the day working, Caleb fixing a section of fence that had come loose, Maylene harvesting the last of the fall vegetables. Morrison stopped by with supplies and news from town, stayed for tea, left with a basket of produce. That evening, they sat on the porch like always, watching the sun go down. The air smelled like wood smoke and earth. In the distance, geese flew south in their V formation, calling to each other. This is enough, Maylene said quietly. This life. This place. You. It's enough. Caleb took her hand. Yeah, it is. And it was. Not perfect, not without its scars and sorrows, but real. Built on dignity and choice and mutual respect. A life earned through defiance and courage, paid for in struggle, worth every moment. The cruel joke that had started on a dusty street in a frontier town had become something neither of them had expected. A partnership, a friendship, a love that didn't announce itself with grand gestures, but proved itself through daily choice and quiet persistence. They'd both been broken when they met, but together they'd built something whole, and in a harsh land that tried to break them, they'd carved out something rare, a place where both finally belonged.